Hello, Steve White, Steve Arts 89. Well, I'm here with my log and I'm going to review Twin Peaks, the series, starting with the pilot, because I love it and I just want to talk about it. And I'm not going to attempt to explain it on a level that other people seem to think they can. It's kind of fascinating to see so many people try and deconstruct and demystify Twin Peaks like it is one singular idea, or yeah, it's just ridiculous. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to talk about the series itself and my experience with it for the most part. Now, I grew up in a small town called Georgetown, Tasmania. It felt a lot like Twin Peaks to me, and when I watched Twin Peaks, it kind of mirrored the town that I lived in and sort of how I felt about that town. Now, in Australia, we got Twin Peaks as a miniseries. The pilot and the first two episodes were shown over 2 nights as a miniseries with like 2 parts. So the first and second episodes were edited together like a movie. So, and it was a big deal. Everybody watched it. Everybody talked about it. There was talk about it for ages. It was really big in the US. Now, we got it a whole year after the US, but when we got it, they still hadn't revealed Laura's killer yet. So we had all the excitement and the build-up that came from it being so popular in the US, but it wasn't ruined, partly because, you know, they hadn't revealed who killed Laura yet, but also because just without the internet and that sort of social media existence we have now, you're able to keep a secret. And as far as I know, nobody let that secret out, and people didn't know who killed Laura until, you know, we saw it on TV, and I'm very grateful for that. That wouldn't happen today. Mind you, today we wouldn't have delays, like a year between something getting from network TV in the US, you know, to TV in Australia. So I had a weird viewing of it because I had a little accident. I cut my middle finger in half and was in hospital. I did it the day Twin Peaks. I think it was the day Twin Peaks was. I think it was a miniseries on Saturday and Sunday. And Saturday morning I cut my finger and I was in hospital that night. So I watched it from my bed, and what fascinated me was, I mean, I was really upset. I felt like I was missing it to a certain extent. I wasn't watching it with my family, but I observed how everyone else was obsessed with it already. And the nurses and the parents of a kid who was brought in that night were, from my memory, more preoccupied with watching Twin Peaks on my TV and not missing any of that than they were with dealing with their own child being brought in. And just the awareness that everyone had of this, growing up in a small town where everyone knows everybody's business and everyone knows what everyone's doing, everyone talks to everyone, and then, you know, seeing the series depicting that same sort of town where the murder affects everyone and everyone knows everyone and everyone talks and everyone's connected, and then to see all the people I know sort of obsessing about this show and talking about it, much like they did the real death of Laura Palmer in Twin Peaks, was kind of fascinating. And I have really strong memories of that time, and like coming home after the hospital and how everything felt different and everything, and just everyone talking about it in school. Reading Laura Palmer's diary, which I lent off a friend of mine who was kind of very much like Laura Palmer in the image of her, one of the sort of most decorated students and blonde and pretty and all that, and it just felt relatable. Everything about Twin Peaks felt relatable, while at the same time being this heightened sense of melodrama and something that we weren't quite sure what it was that was compelling. Now, the original pilot was conceived fairly normally. I mean, people wanted to bring Lynch into TV because they thought he could offer something, and they were really struggling in the ratings. ABC was struggling, and they thought he could bring something new, but they were totally afraid, and they were just like, let's just experiment, let's just give him some money, see what happens. They didn't quite know what they got, but they did go with it, but it was hit and miss and touch and go for a while. They were given the money for a pilot, but no promise for a series, and they had to have in the contract that they would film an ending in case it didn't get taken to series, so they wouldn't lose their money and they could release it as a TV movie, and also like internationally and on DVD and video and stuff like that. So originally, when they conceived of it, it was seemed to be a fairly straight mystery drama. They were just in love with the area. and the mystery and the murder, there was a real story that was sort of they were aware of, and a real legend they were sort of aware of, and then there was a real town, and some of the people who worked on the series were just familiar with the area that was set in, and there was sort of this mystery that they were trying to sort of capture, and then when they actually went to film it, it was one of the worst winters they'd ever had, and they did capture this sort of otherworldly, extreme sort of atmosphere that the town had at that time, and it's beautiful, and it reminds me of how I remember Tasmania being when I lived there before, like, you know, climate change dried it out. It's not the place I remember when I was a kid, and certainly my mother said it isn't the place she grew up in, like, you know, 40 years before that. She was 79, and she'd said that years ago. But I mean, there were a lot of people trying to explain the series, and it's a bit of an egotistical, narcissistic thing where there's people, mostly people who don't create art, but they have this real drive to decode it and you know, deconstruct it and conquer it, because since they can't create something, they can't create a mystery, if they can at least take it apart and explain it or rationalize it, I feel like they've destroyed something that they felt inadequate of because they couldn't achieve it. So I feel like there's this real impulse to explain Twin Peaks and take it apart, and I don't feel that impulse. I'm happy to just let mystery wash over me, and that's, some people view it as a puzzle, some people view it as just an emotional, sensory sort of experience. You just experience Twin Peaks, you don't think about it. You try and think about it and work it out, you'll get lost. And that is true, because there is no singular explanation story here. It is something that was created organically, instinctively by these two artists, and then David Lynch added onto it. When they had that ending, that they had to create this ending to explain the whole thing, he came up with that ending, and it's essentially just a dream. Some people struggle how to sort of make sense of the two different endings. I don't have that much of trouble with it. We see the ending of the pilot episode, Mrs. Palmer has a vision of the necklace being found. And then in this extended movie, this European international version, she has a different vision, and then they call the police, and Dale Cooper has a dream. And in that dream, like the rest of it is a dream, but people seem to have trouble with thinking of it. It's just a dream. They seem to have to think that most of it happened, because there is that sort of feeling that this is happening, but it really is just a dream. And then later on, we see him talking about having that dream. So this is a dream that happens later, and Mrs. Palmer does have that vision as well. Whether she's seeing his vision or they're sharing his vision, but something that I find works quite fine. So normally what I do is I watch just the 20 minutes of the international pilot after the first pilot, or I wait until after the I think it was the second episode, so the end of the start of the first episode, I think, is where they meet up in the morning to talk about it. I can't actually remember, even though I just watched it yesterday. Yeah, I'm quite happy to just experience the mystery of Twin Peaks. I don't feel like the need to explain it, and I really find it funny that people think that they can. It's a real narcissistic, arrogant thing where they think that they can look and work out what Lynch, Frost, and all the other writers and directors who worked on the first season, the second season, were thinking, because Lynch wasn't dictating to them what they were to write and how they were to direct. They all added their own elements to it, and Lynch didn't have this one sort of idea of what it was. It all happened very organically. Like when you look at how Bob was created. Now, Lynch was on his hands and knees doing something in Laura's hallway, and he heard the set dresser say to Frank, Bob, not to get himself locked in the room by moving the furniture around, and he just had that, something about that clicked in his head, and he said, get down next to the bed and look through the bed poles, and we're going to photograph you. So along with the pan of the bedroom, they did the pan with Bob in it, not knowing what it was going to be or what it was going to be used for. And then later when Miss Palmer has a vision, apparently, and I've never seen this, I've never noticed it, I've never looked for it, Bob is reflected in the mirror or a photo frame or something behind Sarah. And that was when Lynch said, okay, he is a part of this world, and he was just like, they would just call Frank and say, bring your costume, which was basically just the clothes he was wearing just by chance that day when that happened. and he just became, and that's how Twin Peaks happens. A lot of elements like that were just instinctive, intuitive luck, and people sit down and think that they can work it out and that it was all set down and structured some way that they can decode, is just laughable to me. And I'd never try and do that. I enjoy that there are parts that do have a mystery to them, and there is an answer, and they can be sort of decoded, and that there are elements that were brought in, and it's not all nonsensical, but at the same time it's not one cohesive thing that you can sit down and work out. So the people who claim to have done that are a joke. I'd never try and do that myself. I don't have 4.5 hours to do it, for starters, but it's just impossible, because the series isn't one thing, so you can't. There is no one decoding or interpretation of it. So that being that, I'm going to move on to the rest of the first season. Feel free to share, like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think of the pilot and the beginning of Twin Peaks.